Hello, and welcome to the Moms Love Coaching Podcast, where we talk about self-care from the inside out for moms. I'm your host, Carrie McFarland, along with Angie Turgeon-Ledoux. We are certified life coaches and moms, and in this podcast, we'll go beyond the take a spa day advice and talk about real and sustainable ways that you can feel better, be happier, and stay out of overwhelm and burnout. You spend your life taking care of everyone else. In this podcast, each week, it's all about you taking care of you with no guilt and no apologies. We're so happy that you've decided to spend this time with us, so go ahead and grab your favorite cup of coffee, find a comfortable place, and get ready to spend the next 30 minutes focusing on the most important person in your life, you. Welcome, everybody, to Moms Love Coaching, Self-Care from the Inside Out. I'm Carrie McFarland with Angie Turgeon-Ledoux. Hi, Angie. What's happening this week with you?
Well, we're just coming off a week of our schools have been closed. We had spring break here. I did work a few days. I am feeling rested and ready to go back to work for the last 8 weeks before the summer. Although in my job, the summer is really much busier than it was when I was a teacher.
I'm just getting off of traveling from work, and my daughter is on April vacation. Well, starting tomorrow, we're recording this on a Sunday. So starting tomorrow, she is on April vacation. And so we have a little bit more room in the morning because we're not all up trying to get out of the house at the same time. I take her to school. So we have to leave at 7 a.m. to get her to school. Well, she likes to be there early. She doesn't have to be there until about 10 of 8, but she likes to be there at 7:30. So we leave at 7 to make sure she's there at 7:30. And then I drive to work from there. But I get up at 5 every morning, basically to make sure that I can do everything that I want to do because I have my morning routine that I don't want to give up. And in order to do that, I have to get up at a certain time. So I have to get up at 5 to be able to leave by 7 to make sure I can fit everything in, which is fine. But it is nice when there's a break in that intense time frame.
For sure. I find that I just let all my routines go. Workout? No. Oh, journal? No. Morning routine? What's that? Hit the snooze alarm. I don't hit snooze. I turn the alarm off. And then I have weird dreams.
That happens to me too. If I fall back asleep, it's like the weirdest dreams. That's funny that you say that.
Yeah, it's definitely that. What is it? The light REM sleep that happens when you sleep, add in an additional hour and 90 minutes. 45 minutes, there's something about that.
And that's kind of what we wanted. Well, not the dream part, but the
time,
the routine part, but the time crunch, the routine, the consistency that you have to have in order to do all the things that you need and want to do, in the morning or whenever you're doing them, during the week, during the day, during the month, and it's, the topic for us came up because I was traveling, and I noticed that the way that I traveled this time, it made the time frame very intense, and I had to get up very early for 3 days in a row, 3 o'clock in the morning, in order to make my plane. And I just realized that I did this in a way that didn't really take into account taking care of myself as I was traveling. And so I started thinking about just traveling in general, especially when you have kids, and all the things that you tend to do or feel when you're traveling, because there's so many things that are out of whack. Your routine is off. The kids' routines are off. You don't have the same food that you might have at home. Diet restrictions, and when you have a kid that has different kind of allergies and sensitivities, and making sure that you have everything that you need from them because you're going to be away from home for 3, 4, 5 days.
It's another layer of complexity and stress. You won't necessarily be able to run into a grocery store to pick up a thing.
Right, exactly. Or what most people do is you get gas and you get snacks at a convenience store, but that's not available to everybody because the snacks at a convenience store aren't normally allergy friendly. Mm-hmm. You can find some stuff, but
they're getting better.
They're getting better. But as you know, with kids, right? Mm-hmm. They like what they like, and you could have the same thing, but they're different brands and it tastes slightly different and they won't want that. So you have to make sure you have the brand of the thing that they want or they're not going to eat. I know that there's philosophy out there that, they're going to eat what I give them to eat. Nah, it doesn't always work.
It doesn't always work. If you have kids who have food sensitivities,
yes,
who have to, there's a reason why they prefer a certain brand or, certain ingredients.
Yeah.
It just adds another layer. And let alone if it's yourself too, if it's yourself that's trying to, like, I've traveled and I don't necessarily have dietary restrictions, if you will, but I've traveled when I'm trying to eat in a certain way. And it's like, I don't want to have a bag of chips or crackers. I want, like if I'm trying to avoid white flour, trying to find those kinds of snacks to support that is much more challenging. When you're traveling with your children, just traveling alone, when you're trying to do those things, there's a certain element of planning. When you're traveling with those kiddos, if you're traveling with littles, oh my goodness, I had my grandson here yesterday and he's 6 months old, and just traveling from his house to our house, we needed the certain stroller so that would work in our dirt road, in our, on our dirt driveway, in our bumpy yard. And we needed the certain kinds of milk in the bottle and the certain space for the car seat. And I'm like, and this is just for 3 or 4 hours, 5 hours at Gigi's.
Yeah.
So it's
like the smaller they are, the more stuff you have to pack.
No kidding. The kid is little, but the stuff is big.
Yeah, I remember that too, going to visit our parents, and like you had to take the pack and play, you had to take the stroller, you had to take the what do you call it? That thing that they sit in,
bouncy chair
around, the bouncy chair. You had to you to take all this stuff, and I guess you don't have to, but you're just trying to like make your life easier, because again, when you're traveling with kids and they're out of their routine, it doesn't matter if it's for 5 minutes, 5 hours, or 5 days. It screws them up. And like every kid is different. Some kids are more sensitive to that than others, but when their schedule is off, it affects their whole day. It affects how they react to things. Like they're more sensitive, they're crying more, then they get overtired, and then they won't sleep. And then that spills into the next day. And it's tough. And it's the stuff that people don't talk about. Like I remember thinking that when my kids were little, well, I shouldn't even say kids. It was when my oldest daughter was little, right? When everything that happened happened for the first time.
Yes.
So I have lights. Did you see that?
Yes.
All right. So I will just say I have an office. I got a new office, and so instead of doing this podcast in my house, which I normally do, I'm in my office today. But it is Sunday morning, and so it's off hours for the building, and so the building's on a timer, and so the automatic lights didn't come on, which is fine. I have like little lights to illuminate my space. They just came on, and I wasn't expecting it.
It's so new for Carrie, as you can see.
It's still very new. And actually, I should acknowledge, that's why I probably sound different. It's a little more echoey. I don't have sound absorbers yet, so it's a little reverby. So I apologize to people listening to this podcast if it sounds terrible. I don't know. I can hear that it's a little echoey, but I won't know what it sounds like until I go back and edit it. So if it's really bad and you stick with us this time, I appreciate you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
It will be better next time. I promise. Okay. So what was I saying? When my oldest was little and everything was happening for the first time, I remember thinking, how come nobody told me this is really hard? Everybody wants to see the baby and everybody wants to see their grandkids and stuff, and which is great, but nobody ever talked about how that's really, really tough on the family to travel to those places. And depending on how far you're traveling, like I don't know, had the blessing and the curse of living close enough to our parents that we could drive there, but it was an hour and a half away. So when you have little kids, that's a significant drive. You know, you got to have snacks, you got to stop multiple times to go to the bathroom, or once they're out of diapers anyway. You get there and it's overwhelming because there's so many people, and there's the food's different and the smells are different and everything's just different. And then they're kind of like off their game, and everybody expects the kids to just be like, oh, we're Grammy and Grampies. Oh, oh, we love you. Let's go give hugs. But no, that's when they have like their meltdowns, because now everybody's like descending upon them, and they're just like, ah, so, and again, every kid's different. And I know not everybody has this experience, but I had it. And so I know other people have had it too.
When your children are more sensitive to those things, when the other family members or the folks you're visiting don't necessarily understand that.
Yes.
And it can be, the child becomes overwhelmed, and then it's unpleasant for everyone.
Right. Exactly.
Give us space and time, and we can adjust, but we're going to take a little bit more time than what you think it should.
Right.
But so exactly. So what? I mean, there's so many layers to traveling with your children that I'm thinking about in terms of, we talk about self-care from the inside out. Carrie and I were talking before we started recording. I was talking about like these things that I wish these skills that I've developed in perhaps the last decade that I wish I had when my kids were little, especially my son, because he was raising us as parents as much as we were raising him as a child. The things that I thought were so important then. And a lot of it had to do with thinking that other people had expectations for me or him. Yeah. And I didn't think that it was okay for me to just do what we needed to do in order to make it good for him, or me. Like me as the mom, or my husband, what can we do in this situation to make this easier for us and easier for him? These are some of the things that I wish I'd known then, and not to take it take it to heart. I was just taking it to heart if he wasn't behaving in a certain way, or if he responded in a certain way, or you take the kids on the trip cross country, which we did a few times, and then the stress of it all, getting everybody out the door and getting, making sure you have all the things. Mm-hmm. If I just thought in the moment to just be like, what can I focus on doing right now that's going to make this easier and better for everyone? This is a tool set that I wish I had understood better when I was raising those little kiddos and trying to do that.
Me too. I think the expectation thing is spot on, because I think that's what it is. And the way that I think about it is, especially like when it sort of spills into everything, but like, especially when you're visiting the grandparents, right? Mm-hmm. Which are our parents, right? Mm-hmm. We still have that identity of being their child. Yeah. And their expectations of us matter, especially when your kids are little and you're a new mom. Because I don't think this part necessarily applies to when you have 2, 3, 4 kids, right? Because by that time, you have fully moved into the I am the parent role, right? But with your first, it's different. It's like you're still in transition of that identity of becoming a mother. It's like you are a mother, but there's lots of things that get in the way of you really taking a stand and saying, no, this is not what's best for my child. And so I'm not doing that, right? You're still like in the middle of like, well, they have this expectation and it's not going to be that bad and blah, 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 right? You just kind of go along with it. It sort of feeds into what we talk about building that identity of somebody who prioritizes themselves. You're building that identity of becoming a mother, and a mother who is a mother first instead of a child first, right? Because I mean, you're always your parents' child, no matter how old you are. And so it does create like that weird dynamic, but stepping into that role completely, just like if you step into you prioritize yourself no matter what. And I think the two of them are closely linked, because if you are, taking a stand for, and I don't mean taking a stand as in like you're battling somebody, but just like knowing what your boundaries are and knowing what you want to do for your child and knowing why, and just sticking to that, even if people kind of, we really wanted you here, or it hurts our feelings when they don't want to hug us, or things like that, and you just are like, well, I'm sorry, but that's just the way it is, kind of a thing. I think that those things are closely linked, because if you do that and you set your boundaries, then you are also taking care of yourself, because you know what you're doing and you know why. Like, you've made a decision, you've created your boundaries, you know why you've done that. You're very confident in your decision. And so it's not just doing what you need to do for your child, but you're also taking care of yourself in that way, because you're not second guessing yourself constantly. You're not thinking that, well, if I don't do it the way they want, then I'm a terrible person. You're just like, no, this is what I need to do in order to take care of all of us. This is what I need to do. And just owning that and just being that person.
The boundary thing is so important. And you're especially vulnerable as a new parent, visiting the family members, balancing your new identity, your fragile identity as a parent with what you think is their expectation of you. Just being aware and being willing to question it. What is happening right now that is making me feel this way? Like, maybe I'm feeling a little extra stress. And then, of course, my baby or my toddler or my tween is picking up on that. They have a wonderful way of being able to pick up on it and then using it to their advantage. Right? and they're challenging you, perhaps. I think there's a learning curve. Like, you didn't expect that this is that you would feel it so strongly, but then being really conscious that I want to show up when I'm in these situations. I want to show up in a way that I can leave at the end of the day and know that I did the best I could to be the best I could in that situation, and that my relationship with my child was the most important thing, not, how the extended family members felt. I mean, that takes some work, bravery. I have a situation where when Jacob was a baby, we came home and my husband was stationed overseas. We stayed with my parents, and my mom was concerned he wasn't getting enough food and wanted him to start eating solid food. I didn't really have a strong feeling one way or the other about it. And I knew that he wasn't ready for it. And we tried it and he just like spit it all out. He was not ready. Those kinds of things can really make you question yourself as a parent, as a new parent. I don't think anybody told me, or I didn't understand then, that it was okay for me to say, is this something that I want to take a stand on, and that it's okay for me to have an opinion about it and say, no, thank you, we're not going to do that right now, and be okay with it. And that how they respond to that is really their prerogative, right? You don't have to. And that's where, again, that boundary is. The boundary is always about what you're going to do, not about what the other person is going to do.
Right. And not in a battling sense. It's more of I'm just doing it this way, and I know why I'm doing it this way. And they probably will get upset about it, but that's all right. I'm just going to, and this isn't, this is just how you feel about it. What you're saying internally, it's like, I know they're probably going to get upset about it, but I'm not doing it to hurt their feelings, and I'm not doing it to be difficult. I'm just doing it because this is what we need in that moment. And I know that, and just being kind of solid and confident in that choice. But I also want to talk about the times where, maybe that didn't happen, right? The times where, like you said, your mom said that and you tried it. And in that particular instance, it didn't sound like it was a big deal. It's like you tried it, he spit it out, and you were like, oh, I kind of knew that was going to happen.
He's not ready.
But, there are other things that happen that turn into this big disaster type situation where kids end up screaming and it's not what's good for them, but you're feeling so much pressure from other people. whether it's your family or not, to just keep kind of like going with the group. And so you do that, even though you know it's probably not the best thing for your child, it's probably not the best thing for you, and you go along with it anyway. And it does end up turning into like a big disaster, right? We've all had that too.
Yes.
And just
Like, why did I do that?
yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, at least for me, like when stuff like that happened, I would just get very angry. I would get angry at them. I would get angry at my kid for having a blowout. Like I became so overwhelmed that everything and that happened around me and what everybody did and said around me, it just made me very angry. And so I would react in a certain way that obviously didn't make the situation better.
Right.
Like,
Oops.
so now not only is it not the greatest situation, now I'm contributing to that and making it even worse. And so it turns into this whole huge thing. I just want to talk about that a little bit, because I think when those things happen and then, time goes by, either, hours, days, weeks, years, and you look back on it and you might feel some regret about how that happened and how you reacted, and you wish you could have made a better memory in that moment and thinking back on it. And I just want to acknowledge that, because that is also the time where you can also make the next best decision for yourself when you're looking back on those things and maybe feeling regret and kind of, having that negative self-talk, beating yourself up. I shouldn't have done it this way. I should have done it that way. Just recognizing that in that moment, you did the best that you could. And even though if that moment happened the exact same way now, knowing what you know now, with the experience that you have now, with the confidence that you have now, like maybe you would have done it differently. It doesn't matter, because that is what happened. And it's maybe not ideal when you look back on it, but it's also not anything to beat yourself up about or feel like you did the wrong thing or feeling regret about that, because that just kind of layers on that shame and negative self-talk, and that
Helpful for sure.
that's not taking care of yourself. So it's like, I always like to say that, because when we talk about these things, like, maybe do this and maybe do that, and have these boundaries and have these things. It's not to say that the way that you handled things before was wrong or bad or terrible. It's like, those things are part of your process. Those things are part of your experience. And so you're not going to get to where you're going if you don't go through some of those things. It's just the way that it is. And I also like to say that because I see a lot of things on social media about parenting advice and making sure that you don't do this with your kid or talk this way to your kid, or, just all those things that I see. And I never see anything that says you did yell at your kid and here's why that's okay. You did lose your shit on your kid that day, and here's why that's okay. It's always or at least from what I've seen, it's always, here's what you should do. And that's great if you find those tools, like either before your kid is born or like right after, and you follow all those things all the way as they grow up. And that's fantastic, right? If you can do that, but that's also not realistic. And I just don't think there's enough talk about when you do lose it, like when you do something that when you look back on it, you wish you didn't do, like yelling at your
I didn't
kids.
handle that very well. It wraps into the theme of self-compassion. You're doing the best you can. And sometimes the best you can, you're going to look back at that and say, ooh, that wasn't very good. But that was the best I had to offer at the moment. I think another thing that keeps coming to mind is Byron Katie says, you can argue with the past, you'll only be wrong 100% of the time.
Yeah.
And there's ways that you can make that learning and reflection useful. But arguing with it, wishing you hadn't done it, regretting it, beating yourself up for it is certainly not going to help you the next time you are facing a circumstance that's similar or
Right.
brings up a similar set of feelings. And we know that traveling with your with your children, visiting family members you don't spend a lot of time with, that you have complex relationships with, can bring up all kinds of stressors that you might not have had the opportunity to practice yet with your while being a parent.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Right. Exactly. It's like those opportunities give you the opportunity to practice, right? I mean, that,
right.
that's kind of how it goes. So going back to the traveling, like I want to talk a little bit about things that you can do either before or while you're traveling in order to make sure that you are taking care of yourself, because the stress can really it doesn't just wreak havoc on the experience. It wreaks havoc on you, on your whole system. And just, I think the first thing that I would say about it is just acknowledge that traveling, either with or without kids, but especially with kids, is difficult. A lot of people will kind of try to dismiss that, and like you're making a big deal about it, like you can't handle it, sort of like making it about your ability to navigate yourself in the world. And it's not about that. It is difficult sometimes when you're traveling for all those reasons that we mentioned. You're out of routine. Maybe you're seeing family that's stressful. Your kids are out of routine. And so that changes the way that they behave, which is another stressor. The food is a possible layer of that. So all of those things, it is difficult. And I think that it's important just to acknowledge that it's difficult instead of trying to convince yourself that it's not. It is. Does that mean you don't do it? No, it just means that if you're aware of something, then you can sort of navigate it better, right? It's sort of like going into a room that's completely dark and trying to walk around with furniture in it. If you're not aware that the furniture is there, you're going to keep bumping into stuff and falling over and, maybe hurting yourself. But if you turn the lights on and yeah, the room is crowded with furniture, that's a fact. You're acknowledging that, and now you can weave your way around it, right, and get to where you want to go.
And that to me is that self-compassion, that self-care. For me, how can I make this easier for me so that it's then easier all around? Just allow things to proceed. And instead of wishing it could be different and wanting it to be different, and then upsetting yourself because it's not the way you think it should be. I guess it's sort of like a version of rolling with it. Roll with the punches.
Yes, that's exactly what I was just going to say. It's just going with the flow, rolling with the punches, right? So that's really the second thing, is just knowing that whatever it is that you planned is not going to go the way you planned.
Exactly.
It never does. I mean, it never does. And that's not a reflection on you. It's not a reflection on your kids. It's not anything terrible. It's just that's just the way it goes. I mean, we were talking before we started this about, your son having the ear infection or the swimmer's ear, and then the ear infection, and your daughter having pink eye. And that's happened to me too with the ear infection, where everything was fine. The kids weren't sick. And then all of a sudden, my daughter started screaming at the top of her lungs because her ear hurt, like out of nowhere. And we ended up having to pivot, find a minute clinic on the fly, go there, have her diagnosed, get antibiotics, some pain meds, and it's like Tylenol, and then like go on our way,
And instead of, I'm wondering, like, if afterward you took a minute to say, look at us. Ooh, we managed that. We handled it. Like, to celebrate the fact that you could pivot and you got your kiddo what she needed. And then I'm guessing, no, you were just like, oh, get right back on let's get right back onto it. Our tendency is not to recognize when we do make a pivot like that. It might be bumpy and it might not be look how you would do it if you had intentionally planned it that way. But to say, look, I managed that. Like, yay me. Yeah. Like, pat myself on the back. I am making this work. I'm making it work for me. I'm making it work for my partner. I'm making it work for my kids.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm
Yep.
guessing you didn't like have a little celebration.
No, I did not have a celebration. I didn't have a meltdown about it. Like I didn't freak out about the fact that, you know, we were going to be late, which was always like such a huge thing, which goes into my next tip. The fact that we said we were going to be there at whatever time, and now we're going to be an hour and a half late because we had to do this. Right. And so I wasn't upset about that. It is what it is. But yeah, no, there was no celebration. No celebration.
So here's a tip. Give yourself credit for when you pivot and it works out.
It goes back to acknowledging that those things are hard, and it doesn't mean that you can't do it. It just means that you're acknowledging that it is difficult sometimes. Like you're not just going through the world by yourself. You have humans that you are responsible for that have their own personalities and own, you know, things that happen, and you can't control those things that happen.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be challenging. The third tip, and actually I did have 3 and now I have 4 because of what you just said, but the third tip is give yourself room when you're traveling. Don't make everything so tight, and don't make everything so like time dependent, even if it's like self-imposed. Like we always had this thing, like we would, you know, reverse engineer when we had to be at a place, right? So we're like, okay, we want to be there at noon. So it takes us this much time. So we have to leave the house at this time, which means that they have to be up at this time and the car has to be packed at this time, right? So you like go do the backwards math to make sure that like everything's on schedule so you can leave at that time. Now, why did we need to leave at that time? Literally no reason. We just made it up. Like that's just when we decided we wanted to be there, and that's so we knew when we needed to leave to be there at that time. There was no real reason for it. We weren't catching
you
a
were going to a
plane.
wedding.
No, we were going to a wedding. We weren't catching a plane. Like we literally just like made that time up in our head, but decided that that was complete fact, and we had to do it that way. When things didn't go as they planned, as I just talked about, right? We didn't go with the flow. We completely freaked out because now we're off schedule. And so everything is a disaster. So now it's like, go get your stuff and get your shoes on, right? And if they're babies, obviously they can't do that. But if they're like little enough that they don't really listen, but they're old enough to actually do the things you're asking them to, like that's when it gets super frustrating. You know,
exactly.
Like, trying to get it in the car, and then do we have everything, and then trying to go through the house and making sure that we didn't forget anything, and do we have the blankies, and do we have the snacks, and do we have the stuffies, and do we have this, and do we have that, right? And so it's like this intense circus of running around the house and trying to get out, and everybody's emotions are high, and the kids are feeling it. So now they're having kind of meltdowns because you're kind of having your own meltdown about leaving at a certain time that you literally just made up and don't really need to do that. Mm-hmm. Giving yourself space for allowing those things that are going to go wrong. And then the fourth thing, based on what Angie just said, is so celebrate yourself when things happen like that and you navigate through it. And even if you didn't navigate through it the way that maybe you would have wanted to, you still got through it and you still ended up getting where you wanted to go. And so celebrate that, because that was freaking hard and it deserves a celebration. Those are the things would make travel much easier if we could sort of like adopt that and feel that internally, those 4 steps. So acknowledging, going with the flow, giving yourself space and time, and then celebrating.
I like it.
I wish we had this podcast when our kids were little.
I know. Wish I had my toolkit when my kids were little, but
yeah, exactly.
I mean, because we didn't have that toolkit, I think is what helps us understand why it's so valuable now.
All right. Well, everybody, have happy travels wherever you're traveling.
Yeah.
whether it's on a plane or in a car or to vacation or to family, or even if you're traveling by yourself, those same rules apply because things happen. Happy travels, everybody, and we will see you next week. Thank you so much for listening today. If you enjoyed this episode, it would mean the world to us if you like, subscribe, and share. And don't forget to leave us a 5-star review on iTunes or Spotify. This makes it easier for everyone to find us and helps us spread our message about self-care from the inside out. Have a wonderful week, and remember, making yourself the priority is the highest form of self-care.